And the story is that, like tame animals, animals helped them and protected them until they lived and grew. And then finally, people assisted them. And out of those two boys, that animals became friends to them and kept them alive and protected them from other vicious beasts. They grew up, and being raised in the woods, they were very tough boys. They were strong. They could endure bad weather. They could go without food and drink. They were strong. And one of those boys' name was Romestus. And from that name, Romestus, came Rome. It came from that boy that was raised in the woods. Well, through the years, people started moving into that area because they were looking for better land and some looking for freedom, until there became a community of people in those mountains in southern Italy. They were accumulating. Quite a few people came into that area to live. They had no government. As that city of Rome was in its infancy, there wasn't any government, there wasn't any man leading it, just sort of a group of men in that community that was vile. They began to tell other people what to do. Then there were good people that just lived normal lives and raised food and families and ate food, and just normal people. One time, those good men that worked hard, they're not Christians, but they were good in that they worked hard and fed their family. Those men got together to go up in the mountain and hunt and kill some deer and bring down the meat for people to eat. While they were gone in that community that is now Rome, those evil men, those wicked men that were bullies and trying to run everything, while they were up there, they went and got the most beautiful girl in the town, a beautiful young lady, which was part of the hard-working people. And while they were gone, those men took that girl, they abused her, they raped her, they ruined her physically, and almost killed her. Then the hunters came back, the good men that work hard, raised their families. They came back from the mountains. And when they got home, everybody told them what happened. These bullies that run this town, they took that best-looking, wonderful, beautiful young lady. They raped her publicly. They've ruined her. Those men that had been deer hunting found those fellows and beat them and killed some of them and took over running that city of Rome, run by a bunch of farmers that went deer hunting. They came up and beat up on those fellows that molested that girl, and they just destroyed them. Well, who's going to run things now? Well, they took over. What kind of government they're going to have? Socrates in Greece had developed a government of republic that was run by the people. You got the people and let them decide what the government should do. That was a republic. And those men started a republic of Rome, where the people would make the decisions. They got it from Socrates. Our government is supposed to be like that. It's known as a republic, and it's governed by the people through representatives. They started. Rome is in its infancy. It's not a powerful nation now, Greece is a powerful country, and Persia and Syria. But Rome's just developing. They're just growing, and they got this republican government, and they keep growing, and people keep going there, and Rome keeps getting bigger and bigger and bigger, and they got this government of republic where everybody's there. As it grew, they devised a government. There was never any king in Rome. They didn't have a king that was running everything like every other country was. They had kings, like Pharaoh in Egypt. He ran everything. Nebuchadnezzar in Babylon ran everything. But Rome had no king, no leader. The government was structured until the top men were the Senate. The Senate in America, they vote and decide things for this country. The Senate. Not if you're interested in politics, this is a remarkable thing. If you're not interested in how governments function, it doesn't mean anything. But the Senate of Rome were old men who sat with white gowns on and sat and never voted on anything. The Senate of Rome never voted on anything. They were only an advisor body. Under the Senate of old men that met, dressed in white with long hair, they advised men that were known as the tribunal. That was the government underneath the Senate. The Senate never voted, but the tribunal did. The tribunal made decisions about the military. The tribunal made decisions about slavery. The tribunal made decisions about Rome and what they would build and what they were run by this tribunal underneath the Senate. But the Senate never voted on anything. The tribunal did, and the tribunal controlled the military, and they controlled the slavery. And at that time in Rome, 4 out of every 5 men was a slave. 4 out of every 5 men. Rome got strong. Rome was building things nobody else ever built. Rome was building roads. Rome was building aqueducts that would carry water from a lake to a city far off that has no water. They built those things, those roads, those aqueducts, and they built Rome to be a magnificent city of towers and buildings, and the Forum right in the middle of Rome. And they started a postal system in the world. There was never anything like, I mailed 2 letters this morning to 2 different families. And there was no postal system like it. Rome started mail. Rome started sending letters from one place to another. That started in Rome. They built, and they started the life of the slaves and medicine. They influenced music, sculpture. They had the greatest one in the world, Michelangelo. He painted the Sistine Chapel in Rome, lying on a scaffold. He was a Christian in his mind, and he made the greatest sculptures in the world. He sculptured things out of stones that today are worth millions and millions of dollars. Rome was developing. Rome was getting to be a big city, big country. Syria was going down. Greece was going down. But Rome is developing into a great, colossal government. And after they got building buildings and everything, they developed an army. That army of Rome marched over the world. They conquered everybody they came to. They made everybody slaves where they came, and they made everybody that they conquered pay taxes. Their army was a juggernaut that would destroy anything that got in its path. They lined up, first of all, a group of men on the front line that had swords about this long, and they used them. But between those two men with those swords, there stood a man behind every two men with a sword 15 feet long. If the people they were fighting came and got up next to that front row, there were those men back there with 15 feet long spears that would jab them. And behind that, they put the infantry of the army. And behind that, the old men went and fought in every battle. They brought up the rear, working on things that were left over. Some man that was an enemy wasn't dead. They finished him off. That Roman army was tremendous. They started marching. Where they marched, they conquered people. Nobody ever defeated. You wouldn't even resist them. When they saw the Roman army coming, most of the nations just gave up, because they're going to stab you and they're going to take over. And they did that. Now, as they move toward the 500 mark, 500 years before Christ, and starting the 500 year after, they're moving up. They've developed from two boys in the woods to a community, to a big city, to a big government, and a big army, and architects, and that was superior to any in the world. It's great. And Julius Caesar comes along, Julius, and he leads the army. He marches that army up there and took Germany. He marched that army to Spain and took Spain. He marched that army to northern Africa and took over Carthage. He marched that army clear up to where England is today. There's marks of what they built there still in England today. He conquered everything in the west of Rome. Everything in the west, Germany, Spain, France, all of that. Julius Caesar conquered them. Now he's coming home. He's been gone 5 years. He's marching his army back. He's coming back. These fellows in Rome are Republican. They have a republic. No man rules over them. The Senate has a meeting. The tribunal has a meeting. Caesar has defeated everybody he marched. He now has led his army over Spain, northern Africa, and Europe. He's powerful. He's coming home. When he comes, he'll make himself king. We've never had a king. We got a republic. He's coming home. The Senate said, send word to Caesar not to come back. They went away. When an army went away and conquered over 5,000 people, they had a parade for them through the Arc of Triumph, and the leader rode in a golden chariot with white horses pulling it at the very front. And then behind him, they had all the slaves they had conquered tied up and moping along because they had brought slaves in. And behind them were the soldiers, and then there were wagon loads of stuff that they had taken from the countries where they had from a great parade, and all the people came out and stood at the side as the army came in. And a man stood behind Caesar and held a thing up over his head that recognized him as the leader. Tell Caesar not to cross the Rubicon River. Don't, Caesar's not coming home because he's going to make himself king. And this is a republic. We've never had a king. He's going to make himself king. They told him. They sent word. Don't cross the Rubicon. He come up there with his army. They're all lined up on the river. Over there's Rome. Don't cross that river. Caesar said, forward march. He marched across the river. and he marched his army into Rome. Caesar had no intentions to be a king. He didn't want to be a king. But when he comes back, the Senate is still leading, the tribunal is still leading, and Caesar's back. He's been away. He's not fighting to be king. They have a big banquet for him for what he did while he was away. Had this luscious banquet. Now, Caesar came in and sat as the host of that banquet because they're honoring him. Mark Antony was sitting over on the side. He liked Caesar. He ran around behind him when they were eating at this big banquet, and Mark Antony set the crown on his head. Caesar took it off and said, I don't want to be king. And they went ahead. Then another day they were at occasion, and Caesar was there. The evil men are saying he's still going to be king. He's just laying waiting for the minute to be king. And Caesar had an illegitimate child. His name was Brutus. And Brutus grew up hardly recognized as Caesar's child. But Brutus was one of the enemy. And when Caesar was sitting at the honorable banquet, Brutus, his son, his illegitimate son, came up with a knife and stabbed Caesar in the back and killed him. Killed Caesar. People loved Caesar. He had won the battles. Brutus killed him. Then Mark Antony's mad. Mark Antony's mad because that group killed him and wanted to be king. And Mark Antony and his men and a man named Octavius and his men began to fight over who's going to rule. And Mark Antony, good man that he was, he lost. Octavius won. Octavius changed his name to the god of August, Augustus. And in the days of Augustus, Jesus was born. Augustus changed his name from Octavius to Augustus for the god of August. And he is the first king of Rome. But they don't use the word king. They use the word Caesar. They never called the leaders of Rome king. They were called Caesars, which means the same thing. One man's running things. Caesar. The German word for that is Kaiser, and World War I was started by a German who didn't use the name Caesar. He used the name Kaiser, which means the same thing. So the first Caesar of Rome was Augustus. He was on the throne when Jesus was born, and Augustus was the first Caesar, and he declared that he was divine. Augustus declared divinity, that he was God. A man ruling when Jesus was born. Made two kings in the world, Augustus and Christ. Now they've spread out all over the place. They've appointed governors like Felix, like Festus, like Pilate. Pilate, when Julius Caesar went to Spain, they took prisoners. They brought him back. Pilate was in the group with the prisoners marching down the street. Then he is clever, and he struck up a romance with Caesar's daughter, and they didn't get along. but he married Caesar's daughter. Caesar gave him his position as Pilate, where he reigned for 10 years as governor, and during that time, the crucifixion of Christ. But they picked up Pilate. He's a Spaniard. He's not a Roman. But when he comes back and marries Caesar, he declares himself a Roman, and he gets a political appointment as governor of Judea. He's a bum. He came from Spain. He doesn't even know the way of the Roman government. And he's got a job because he married Augustus Caesar's daughter. And they send him over there to rule those Jews, the hardest people to control in the world. So Pilate lands at Caesarea, and to show the Jews that he's tough, he killed 14 Jews because they wouldn't bow down and declare Caesar as God. He killed them. Jesus mentioned it. He mixed the blood of those Galileans with their sacrifice. He mixed their blood together. Pilate did. Well, I said that to say that's where Pilate came from. But back to the Caesars. There were 9 of them in a row. Not the republic anymore. The tribunal does not run the government. The Caesar, the king. There were 9 of them. If you want to study, which I don't think any of you would be interested, there's a book down at the library, the public library, The 9 Caesars of Rome, written by an Italian by the name of Suetonius. And Suetonius wrote about Augustus. He wrote about Claudius Caesar. He wrote about Tiberius Caesar, Claudius Caesar. They were all different. They were all different. Augustus Caesar would allow Jews in Rome. Claudius Caesar ran all the Jews out. When Aquila and Priscilla came down to Corinth and Paul met them, they had lived in Rome, but Claudius put them out, and they had to go somewhere, so they ended up in Corinth. Claudius would not allow Jews in Rome. After that came Domitian. He's crazy. He killed thousands of Christians. And there was Domitian and Claudius. They were all evil. Get the book, 9 Caesars of Rome, written by Suetonius. Tells them over half of them were homosexuals. They were all murderers that would kill people on an instant. They didn't care about anybody. They'd kill their wife, they'd kill their son, they'd kill their daughter. Anybody that threatened them, they would kill them. The worst of the 9, Nero. Nero killed Paul. Nero directed the beheading of the great apostle Paul. Nero was nuts. Nero was an egomaniac. He thought he could sing, and he sang to the people, and they hated it. He thought he was a musician. He played the violin, and they hated to hear him. But nobody could threaten him. He'd kill them. And he did it when he wanted to burn Rome so he could build another Rome. So he burned it and played the violin while it burned. And then he blamed the Christians for burning it. And he took Christians and tied them to a pole and lighted up the streets at night by burning Christians on a pole all along the streets. They were the street lights as their bodies were burned. He killed them. He's crazy. He's a homosexual. He lived that way. And there arose a rebellion against him. And he fled Rome, went down the road, found an ordinary family, some shepherd people living in a house along the road. He went in and said, hide me. They're going to come and kill me. So big Nero is in a farmhouse hiding. They find him. And they killed him. That was Nero. He went down. There's reference to what Rome did in the book of Revelation. And you can rest this assured. Most of the things that's pointed to about Rome in Revelation was Nero Caesar. Nero. Many think he was they Christians at the time thought he was the prophesied Antichrist. He was an Antichrist, but he was a Antichrist. And he's dead. Now, 9 Caesars, and they've wrecked the country with their lavish lies, their killing lies, killing people. And during that time, everything Julius Caesar did was to the west of Rome. But the east has been unconquered. And Greece is a great country. They were an intellectual country. Rome was a brutal country. And the Greeks didn't fight and kill people like Rome did. They were more dignified, and that's where you got Socrates and Aristotle and Plato and all those great philosophers and the men that Paul debated on Mars Hill. It's a dignified. They marched. Rome is going to destroy the greatest country in the world, Greece. And they marched now, not westward like Julius Caesar, but now Mark Antony goes toward the west. But on the way, he goes down to Egypt. Egypt is being run by a woman, Cleopatra. She's the queen. There is no king, no pharaoh. Cleopatra is running Egypt. She's a beautiful woman and a powerful, strong woman. Mark Antony went down and met her. And Mark Antony and Cleopatra fell in love. And Mark Antony and the head of Egypt fell in love. And when he went to fight Greece and destroy those countries known as Persia and Greece, the great country, he and Cleopatra went together. And she brought the Egyptian army, and he brought the Roman army to go over and conquer Greece and all those countries toward the Bible land. Now, that was done, and these other men killed people, and those other Caesars were crazy. I can't even begin to tell you what all they did. But if you'd read Suetonius' book, I went down to the library and I got Suetonius' book, The 9 Caesars of Rome, and I read it and about them, but I can't remember all the details, but they were out of their mind and evil and killing and family killing and all of that. And then one day, a new Caesar, his name is Constantine. He's walking up the road. He looks over to the side and he says he saw a cross shining. And he says he heard a voice. Conquer in the name of Christ. You can conquer in the name of Christ. You can conquer with the cross. And Constantine went back and said, hey, they're all just killing religious people and all that. It's over. Rome is now a Christian. After killing all the Christians, Rome is now a Christian country. Constantine declared it a Christian country. And he started a church. called the Roman Catholic Church. The Roman Catholic Church. And he took a man and put it at the top of it, and that was the Pope. And then he took the priests that served those pagan temples, and he made them priests in the church. They never got saved, but he made them bishops and priests in the church. Constantine did. And he started favoring the Christians. And as he favored it, the church, now led by a bunch of pagans, begins to grow. And there's the Roman Universal Church, known as the Roman Catholic Church. And the leadership are not even saved. Did Constantine really get saved? I'd ask you one question, which is found in the history which I studied. Why did he continue to build temples for the pagans? After he said he became a Christian and saw that cross, he continued to build temples for pagan gods and for pagan religions. But the church had suffered for 300 years. Now, Rome doesn't persecute it. The church has taken over. And it's called the Roman Catholic Church. It got into all kinds of false teachings. And through the years, they grew. And you could, if you wanted to go out and get drunk tonight, you could come to the priest and pay for your sin before you went, so you could pay for your sin before you committed it. It was called indulgences. They were doing all types of wild things. Went on for years and years and years. And then a man stood up one day and said, "My name is Martin Luther. And down on my church at Wartburg, there's 96 things wrong with the Catholic Church." 96 things. He nailed them to the door. Boy, the leaders of the Roman Universal Church read them. Where is this guy? They got him. Now we're going to bring up a lawyer from Italy, and you're going to stand before him in Germany. You're going to stand before him. And he went in, they had all of his books spread out that he had written, the 96 theses and everything. They said, "You deny that you wrote those." "Here I stand. I can do no other. I stand on what I've written. I can do no other." And they had a meeting. Kill him. Kill him. And the men that believed him and followed him took him and hid him in a castle to keep the Roman Church from killing Luther. They hid him. There he translated the Bible into German. There he wrote the books that he wrote. If you want to visit that place, you can go visit it in the mountains of Germany where they hid him. And there in the room where he wrote his books, there is a blot of ink up on the wall, because one day he was studying and the devil was after him and he couldn't think. He took up the ink thing and threw it at the devil, and it's still against the wall. Well, there was Reformation. What happened to Rome? After 9 Caesars, there's some bad boys up in Germany. They're not called Germans, they're called Gauls. And they decided to take on Rome. They didn't have an organized army, and they didn't have short swords and long spears and that. They never cut their hair. They never fought with a sword. They fought with a club. They never wore a uniform. They fought naked. They came down naked, carrying clubs. And they went into Rome, and they started hitting people in the head. They're wild. and they defeated Rome. They defeated the Roman army. Those wild guys. So, who took over the world? Rome had been on for 500 years. Who took over after Rome? Spain. And they were the greatest persecutors of Christians that ever was. Frederick and Philip, the popes and the royalty, they killed Christians, they killed gypsies, they killed, forget what all, they killed gypsies and Christians. They were terrible. Philip and them, Spain. Oh, you read about the Spanish Inquisition. That's what Spain did to the living Christians and established stronger the Roman Church. All right? After that, Rome came down. The Gauls, they were called Gauls, but they were Germans, fought naked, long hair, with clubs, no swords, spears. They fought with clubs, and they beat the Romans to death. And Rome fell. But that's what we say. But Rome still goes on. You can see it in the courthouse downtown. We got that judicial system from Rome. You see it in sculpture. You see it in sculpture and in music, until the greatest musicians, singers in the world came out of Italy. The greatest man that ever sang in all the world was a man called Caruso. He's an Italian. He had the greatest voice of anybody that ever sang. He's singer number one in the world. He came to America. He sang in New York City. Thousands of people would go out and hear the man. His voice wasn't high. His voice was low. He sang with great power. He sang with such power. The veins burst in his neck and he bled to death. He's the greatest singer ever in the world, Caruso. And that came out of Italy. So they influenced the rest of the world. Even though their army and their authority was done, the Germans stopped that. The influence of Rome went on, still going through the Roman Church. And when I was a boy, if you happened to go to a Catholic church, they didn't sing in English. They sang where they came from, Rome. They sang Latin. That's the language of the Romans, the Latin. Now, I've said all that to say this. Paul has stood before 3 judges. He has stood before a providential king, Agrippa, a governor, Festus, and a governor, Felix. And the verse I read, the only one, they're headed for Rome. What will happen when Paul gets to Rome? When you read in the Bible about Rome, I hope you know something a little bit more about who they were and what they were, the Romans. That's not everything, but that's as much as I can remember of what I studied 20 years ago. I took a summer, and every afternoon I studied the history of Rome. I've often wondered if I went over to Marietta College on the other side of town and took a course of Roman history, what they would teach it, how to teach it, but I never had time to go. But there's something about Rome until then. I did this today because Paul is going to Rome. That's where he's always wanted to go. He will go there and find that great foreman, beautiful cities, 7 mountains. Up on one mountain, there's Capitoline. They built a pavilion up there where they brought every false god they conquered. If they conquered Phoenicia, they took the god of Phoenicia or a statue and put it up there. Up there were all the gods of all the countries that they had ever defeated in war. They had them. And they said, now Christians, we'll just deal with you like we did the rest. You got freedom of religion. Now where is your statue to put up there with the Capitoline Hill? Where is it? We don't have any statue. Our Savior lives in our heart. Our Savior's alive. He's not a statue. He's not an idol. You don't have anything to put up? No, we have no idol of Christ. That brought a different dealing with Christians than any other nation in the world, because all the other nations gave them a statue of their God, and they put it in that building on Capitoline Hill in Rome. It's on 7 hills. Read the book of Revelation. Where will the wicked false church be judged? On the 7 hills. That's in Revelation. Okay. Now there's more, but I don't know what to say. I can't think of everything about Rome because I studied it 20 years ago and I forgot it and somebody stole my tapes. Right. All right. I hope it's helped you a little bit to understand the Bible and what was going on when Paul went to Rome. All right. You're